If anybody's tuning in right now, I'm really sorry about all the issues. But the next live stream, that I'm working this stuff out, will be a lot better. Ah, well, welcome to Occam's Razor. I'd like to thank all my subscribers, and if you hit the notification bell, you'll never miss another episode. If you'd like to leave me a story tip, there's a link down below in the comments. If you'd appreciate what I do and you'd like to support me, there's a link down below. You can choose to support me monthly. The link at the Substack as well. And right, so let's get right into it. So today we're going to be talking about military recruitment and how it's going into the toilet and why that is. And why that is. So as you can see up on the screen here, I have a little piece. Canada's military plans to be in the Arctic on near permanent basis, says commander. Now, I know most Canadians have never really been up to the Arctic, never been really far north. And this picture that you're looking at on the screen right now is not from the Arctic. There are no trees in the Arctic. That's why the description there is only for winter warfare training. So, as a result, a lot of people are really confused about what the military does and what it can do. Well, let's try to clear up some of this confusion. Now, there's an Opnanook that they started up again. I participated in one of those in the past, went up to Pangerton. And I'm looking at my CPU usage right now, and it's 33.4. But I'm looking at my stream, and it seems to be clear. Oh, I'm rather. Right, let's get back to the story. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so we go through the story here, and we see Lieutenant General Steve Wabang says the military's signature Far North exercise, Opnanook, will see an additional elements created. They have a lot of nice plans, but they're not going to have any people. You're going to see why. As you can see, the rates continuing to climb down. Now, with every story that we get from the CBC, and usually it seems to be right now that their go-to guy at CBC to do any stories about the military is this fella down here. Where is he? Murray Brewster. And Murray Brewster, in all his stories, always seems to find some expert at a university somewhere. And these experts have never spent any time in the military. They're very well educated. They have a lot of opinions, but they don't have anything that's actually grounded in reality. And I say this why? Because the person that they are actually quoting here, an apparent expert in Arctic geopolitics, a guy who's probably never slept in a fart sack in a freezing tent out in Winter X. Well, what kind of person is he? Well, this person is a known pro jibby jab man. Yes, here he is back in 2021. I've just been informed by my department head that I will not teach 100 students in a lecture room without a vaccine mandate. I'm confident that both the science and the law support me on this. I'm willing to teach online like I did last year, he said. The science and the law. So anytime you bring up any kind of expert, I'm going to go back in the past and find out what they're like, how they react, and how they support or do not support medical fascism. If they're in support of medical fascism, I'm going to discount everything they say. I don't care how bloody smart they are. They're just unethical. You cannot take anything that anybody is unethical or immoral at the bank or to the bank, because in the end, they will not morally or ethically support you, regardless of what they say. They can be as smart as they can, but if they're spouting lies and believing that their moral superiority trumps yours, you're not going to listen to them. So let's get to the story. Let's get to the actual story, what we're talking about here. Leaked Canadian military report shows many new recruits are quickly leaving. Attrition rate for new recruits more than double the average across forces. Well, why is that? I'm sure there are a number of factors. We'll get into them. The Canadian military insists it's getting a handle on its recruiting crisis. Well, no, you're not. you're not getting a handle on it because you still have CDS Directive 003, which requires a 3 COVID-19 jibby jab requirement after you join. In addition, the effort to retain experienced soldiers, sailors, and aircrew was dealt an important blow recently when a Department of National Defense office set up to find new ways to keep people was defunded. Well, I don't think they're really addressing why people are leaving. And you will see nowhere in this article do they actually deal with why people are leaving. The struggle to recruit new members to both the regular and reserve force has been a major preoccupation as the Canadian Forces faces a shortage of 14,000 qualified personnel. And actually, it's more than 14,000 qualified personnel. We'll get into that as well. But the flip side of the equation has gotten less attention, is the effort to hold on to people, especially in critical technical trades. That's because once you get into technical trades and you're certifying work, you tend to have a lower threshold when it comes to bullpucky. You know what I mean? Because there are no wishy-washy truths when it comes to doing technical trades. Things are either fixed correctly or they are not. They're either faced safely or they are not. You either accept the safety narrative that is actually built into technical trades, or you don't. And if you don't, then you can't certify the work. It's a go, no go kind of situation. There is no gray wishy-washiness like all the woke politics that they try to influence in all the other trades and how they ethically or morally uh, participate in the Canadian Armed Forces. We'll get into that as well because they're trying to uber brainwash people once they get up into the higher ranks. So, but when you're telling people that certain things are not true when they're actually true, that doesn't sit well with the technical trades. So, technical trades are going like, I'm not going to work for a person who thinks like that because seriously, well, let me give you an example. Back in the day, maybe 20 years ago or so now, it's probably been that long, some cook had a great idea that if we made all the other cooks pay for the meals for the shift that they work over at the mess hall, then look at the amount of money we'll be able to save. Because for years, cooks had been eating at the mess because that's where they work. In fact, I would want the cook to eat his own food. Wouldn't you? And besides, it's a really crappy job in the military, so we don't deny them that perk of being able to eat the food that they make that we really want them to eat. But no, some clown and he got promoted over it says, no, we should charge them the food. So not only do you have a really crappy trade that people don't want to join, now you're going to charge them over the meals that they work. That would be like charging a pilot for the fuel that he burns in his plane every time he goes up flying. Yeah, really. That's what it's like. And when we face that kind of BS at the lower ranks, and we see the officers acting with impunity, well, no wonder your recruitment is down in the toilet. According to the evaluation obtained by CBC News, the military's biggest retention problem appears to be among those who've just joined. Well, that has always been the thing. Because when you put them through recruit training, you're going to filter out the people who don't belong there. The highest attrition rates within the Canadian Armed Forces are observed among its lowest ranks and newest members, said the report. Really? Really? I don't think so. I don't think so because you guys went and punted 10%. That's a pretty high rate right off the bat, and we'll see those numbers again later. The reason new members are quitting, training delays and difficult adjusting to military life. Well, so we've always had training delays, and training delays are usually because of available training personnel. And seeing as people are fleeing the armed forces, well, of course you're not going to have enough training personnel. And that department that they were talking about that was canceled to try to retain people. Guess what they did with those people? They threw them into the training system because they are running out of people. But adjusting to military life, uh, they've been doing everything within their power over the past 5 years to change what military life is. Military life is supposed to be achieving the impossible in many ways. We do far more with far less than anyone else. We are given a task, we're given an operation, and we carry it out to the best of our ability. But adjusting to military life means having a schedule, means being able to work overtime and not complaining about it, means going through some rather difficult things and a lot of stress and being able to deal with it. But what they've done to military life recently is they've brought in an ideological narrative, wokeness, if you want, that isn't even compatible with day-to-day life among common sense people. So it's not so much the military life. There was nothing wrong with the military life. In fact, the military seemed to be working along just fine in all these aspects up until the new government changed and the liberals started tinkering with the military. Then the military life changed. In some cases, recruits are waiting over 206 days for training, notably in specialized trades. No SHIT, Sherlock, because you're going to put people through the recruiting office. You're going to tell them to show up at a certain date so they can start their training. And then they go through their basic training. And once they get their basic training, once they pass that, then they go off into their selected trades that they have chosen. If they're going into the Navy and they finish their basic recruitment training, then they're going to be sent over to a Navy training school for that trade. And they're going to sit there until that trade course starts up again. A lot of people in civilian life don't understand how the militaries work, but basically, you're going to be trade qualified, basic training to do all those basic little things that a soldier can, and just common across all elements. Then they're going to go to their trades training. And once they come out of their trades training, they're going to become basically what's called uh, trade qualification level 3. And over the next 2 to 3 years, they will move up towards trade qualification level 4 and 5. And once they reach that 5, they're actually fully trained now in their trade. And now they can start getting trained on the equipment or authorized on the equipment to certify that work. And in these specialized trades, you have specialized trade schools. And where are those schools getting their people from? Well, they're getting them from the very people that are fleeing the armed forces. And that's why there's a delay. So these delays are only going to get worse because the more people leave, the less people we have to train, the longer it takes to train people. Well, I'm sorry, but that's where we're headed to in the armed forces because people just don't want to be there. And it's not because military life is difficult to adjust to. It's because they screwed up the training. They screwed up the training, everything about the military. So people will start finding out that it's not the military of days gone by where military excellence is celebrated. No, equity is now celebrated. Everything has to be brought down to lowest common denominator. That's not that's not the kind of military you want for your country. There are sufficient there are insufficient trainers, equipment, training facilities, and other supports to meet training targets effectively, said the report. Yeah, I know. We've been having that running problem for decades. Talking about equipment, we always use old equipment. We use a lot of donated equipment. This leads to delays, which significantly frustrate new members who often face months of underemployment. Yeah, but what you don't say there is that they're still getting paid, right? They're getting paid. They're getting a paycheck. Yes, they don't feel like they're contributing because they're waiting to get trained, but they're still getting a paycheck. Are they underemployed? I think you're making quite an assumption here because when people join the forces and they complete their basic training and then they are waiting for their trades training, where do you think those people sit? In the past, they used to sit at the training base. They used to be part of the personnel awaiting training platoon, the PAT platoon people. Well, what they're doing now is they're sending these people to the units for the units to babysit them, which is fine, but not fine. Because when you have to babysit people, that takes away from your operational capacity because now you have to have somebody at the squadron babysitting these people, looking after them, having them report to them. Now, you can take them and, you have let's say you have a brand new radio operator, even if they still have those, and, he's waiting for his radio operators course. They don't have that trade anymore, but let's just say, we just made this up. He's waiting for his radio operators course. So they send him to the unit where they use radios. And so he's going to be sitting there. He's not trained to use a radio yet. He hasn't been shown how to use a radio yet, but he's a radio operator. So he hangs out with the other radio operators and he hangs out with them and he sees them how they do their job. And he goes out in the field with them. He does their daily activities with them. He gets involved in squadron activities. He gets the tempo and he goes, "Oh my goodness, this is what I'm going to experience once I finish my training." And then go to the school. He goes, he does his training, he becomes a TQ3 radio operator, and then he goes to his squadron or unit or whatever, and then they'll take him through the rest of the training after that, or they'll send him back to the training at the schoolhouse for the next elevated training. It's all different for all the different trades. Just to say that when they're facing underemployment, guaranteed somebody will be directing them somewhere to do something for them to be looked after because they're going to remember as soon as they've signed on the dotted line, they're getting paid. They're getting paid until they're being released. Defense researcher Charlotte Duval-Lantoine said the Defense Department seems to be approaching the crisis of a linear, one step at a time fashion, fix recruiting, then fix the training system. There we go. Brewster once again has found himself another person, a specialist, an expert, who's never spent any time in the military, never spent any time in the field, but yet she is going to be the top researcher when it comes to recruiting issues. So let's go to her Substack, and she has some information here. We'll show you this, and we'll get into that afterwards. Because when you're sitting like a lame duck waiting for your training, your morale can wane very quickly. Well, there are no lame ducks in the Canadian Armed Forces. There might be injured personnel. And if people are awaiting training, if they're brand new to the military, they're going to be told what to do. Sit there, sit here, wait there. That's the job. You're waiting for training. And if you're having issues with your morale, well, that's a leadership issue. And where has the leadership gone in the Canadian Armed Forces? Where has it gone? Oh, that's right. Most of them are leaving because they're done dealing with the woke stuff. So, of course, you're going to have an issue with morale because the people that are training them, their morale is in the toilet as well. Because, like I said, it's no longer about excellence, it's about the lowest common denominator of equity. We really need to change the way we talk about the current state of personnel. We cannot talk just in pure numbers. We really need to talk about it in terms of how many people are actively doing their job today. Right. That's also known as total effective strength and the total establishment. Here, just bring this up here. So total effective strength refers to the total number of military members who have completed their training and are available to fill trained effective establishment positions. The TEE is the authorized number of positions that a unit is expected to fill with trained personnel. So we cannot just talk about pure numbers. We need to talk about it in terms of how many people are actively doing their job today. Okay, so a unit has a TEE. These are how many people you need in each of these trades. And then a total effective strength, your tests, are the amount of people in your TEE strength, TES, they're actually effective. They're the deployable people. They're the people that are current on everything that they need to be to do their job. And that's just not being current qualified to be able to certify the work that they do in their job, but it means all the other military stuff that they need to be current on as well. And one of those things that needs to keep you current in your TES is your medical category and your physical fitness. People in the armed forces need to do an annual physical fitness test. If they get an exemption doing the physical fitness test, uh, and their CEO allows them to use that exemption, then they can skip a year and then do it the year after that. But typically, people do the PET test every year, and if they get that exemption, that's a little more higher score for their personal evaluation report or whatever it's called today. Well, they're still doing PER, but they call it something different. So if your PT test is out of date, and let's say you couldn't do it because you have a physical issue, well, that's your medical is now out of date. So now your tests. So you have a person who could probably still certify and work at the squadron, but he's just not deployable. So your test goes down. So you're still able to function at the unit, put out the work, but when it comes to deployment, nope, down. That test, I'm sorry, but that guy just doesn't count. His PT test isn't up to date, and maybe he's got a bum knee that's holding him back. We'll get into that later. I need to explain that. There's no point in recruiting if you're not retaining people. Well, that's our current CDS, right? The CDS who was there, who, like all the other people in positions of authority, pushed the jibby jab abuse, saying that if you don't take the jibby jab, you can't stay. So she's the biggest reason why there was no people being retained. So here we have the commander of military personnel, Lieutenant General Lise Bourgeon, said that they're trying to get around the training bottleneck with outside partnerships. What the hell does that mean? Outside partnerships? Outside of the military? Uh, so, what, you're going to set up new recruiting schools? So what they've done in the past in the military is that they have to set up separate additional recruiting training facilities. They do it over in Saint Jean, mostly the recruit training there, but what they will also do in CFB Borden, CIFCME will be tasked to set up a training regime where they usually train a lot of reservists as well, but they also train Reg Force people. They put them all on the same recruit course. The training is pretty well the same. And I know that in CFB Petawawa, they used to do a lot of summer recruit training there as well. In fact, you can do basic training anywhere in Canada because the course is pretty well the same and it's mostly physically demanding. But these outside agencies, I have no idea what that is. What are they going to send them to the United States to do recruiting there? They're the civilian agencies are going to set up to teach recruit training. I have no idea what this Lieutenant General is talking about. There's a great partnership being done with community college and other academic institutions in Canada so that we can use the civilian capacity, Bourgeon said, noting that some pre-qualification can be done in a civilian system. Okay. So what this Lieutenant General there is talking is not about basic training, it's about the trade training, right? The trade training that we used to do in the Canadian Armed Forces at our trade schools, but apparently now they're in such desperate needs, they don't have enough instructors. Looks to me like the leadership has dropped the ball and done everything to piss everyone off, and everyone is leaving, especially your trainers. And now you're making it sound like you're doing a great job. Oh, we'll just use outside agencies. 3 years ago, military took a stab at addressing the issue of keeping people in uniform with a 90-page strategy document. Yes, yes. And then as a result, what did they do? They started coloring their hair, wearing tattoos on their face, jewelry in their face, painting their fingernails. Yeah, that's the kind of military that you decided to create to attract a lot of people. And how did that work out? As part of the plan, the Chief of Defense Staff, now retired Wayne Ear, set up a program office to collect data analysis to provide guidance for senior leaders on how best to keep members from leaving. Well, uh, General Ear, the best thing back then to keep people from leaving would have been not to impose fascist medical mandates, uh, coerce them into an experimental jibby jab without informed consent, and then punt them. Punt them if they didn't take them, and all the while abuse them, call them names, treat them like all the service they have done, whether they're veterans or not, whether they've been got medals on their chest or not, just treat them like second class citizens. Make them feel like crap, and then expect all their peers to respect you after you've treated them. That's uh, that's what he did. The evaluation report obtained by CBC News said retention efforts of the military's top commanders had made little progress, partly because of the limited awareness of the strategy introduced by Ear and former Defense Minister Anita Anand. Yes, limited awareness. I don't know how many times I've said on these videos and how many times I posted right on her Twitter stream how what she has done is completely evil. Anita Anand was the defense minister when the jibby jab was introduced, and now we have injured personnel and personnel who were unalived who have been denied duty of care, being told that, oh, sorry, your injuries and the unaliveness that was caused to your family member from taking the jibby jab is not work related. That's right. Not work related, even though you have to take the jibby jab to keep your job, and all of these issues were caused by it. Sorry, not work related. Off to vaccine injury support program for you. Oh, sorry, was that over 3 years ago? Yeah, sorry, you're not entitled to VISP either. So we're just going to abandon you. And that story right there is also well known amongst the troops in the Canadian Armed Forces because now they see a chain of command and a government that abandons its own duty of care responsibilities for its members. And you wonder what's being exacerbated? You wonder why people are leaving? Because of this. And the fact that these news stories from the government run media never mention what really started the exodus. Hmm. In a statement late Thursday night, the department acknowledged the office had been shut down. And that's the office that they had done to try to keep people in. And of course, they sent them to the training system because they're just running out of people. The department insisted its overall retention strategy is still in effect and that its available resources have not changed. That's right. They're never going to change. They're going to hang on to the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Plan and CDS Directive 003 requiring 3 jibby jabs in order to be a fully employable Canadian Armed Forces member so that your TES, that's right, so the total effective strength, if you don't have those 3 jibby jabs, you're not on the test. You're only an additional body in the TEE, non-deployable. Interview evidence shows that there is a perception leadership is prioritizing culture change over critical operational needs like ammunition and equipment, said evaluation. Yeah, I need to read that line right there. So that's people were being asked, why are you leaving? Why is recruiting not good for you? Why are you leaving? And I go, yeah, culture. Yeah, yeah. I walked into the men's room and I saw a tampon dispenser. I said, this is not the culture for me. That's what they're saying, right? And it's not about a military culture. No, no. Whatever culture is going on in the Canadian Forces right now is not a military culture. It's an ideological indoctrination of diversity, equity, inclusion, of everyone being at the lowest denominator. And God forbid you say anything that might offend somebody because that's going to eat up a maybe a week's worth of your actual work because you're going to be in and out of meetings. Maybe they'll have a little special tribunal, maybe send you on a little struggle session. Have time in offices talking to supervisors. Oh, you said something wrong. Your head's not right. Blah, blah, blah. Tell me that's not going on. Tell me that's not going on in the Canadian Armed Forces right now. If you stick around long enough for this video, you'll see what I mean once we get into the actual policy. Early data shows that this initiative has had positive effects, allowing some recruits to transfer to other element after initially joining the RCN. And now we're talking about the Naval Experience Program. So there was a program back in the early 80s before I joined the Armed Forces in 84. The name will come to me later. But basically what it was a single year program that people could join the military, go through basic recruitment training. They become BMQ qualified, and they would keep them employed for a year. And then after that year, if they wanted to stay in the military, then they could transfer to another trade like this, transfer to a different element. But now you've actually employed them for a year. You kept them off the street. They got some pocket change, and they may or may not stay in. They might go back out now in the civilian world, or they might move forward. And now you've got more people. And this was done outside of the actual regular training program. And so this was done outside of the regular recruitment of just getting additional people through basic military qualifications, or BMT back then was called basic military training, not BMQ. So it looks like they want to do something similar. But this is not the early 80s anymore. This is the mid 2020s. And the world is a much different place. And the military is not the same military that it was back then. We were still wearing steel pots using 1963 pattern webbing with Velcro back then. We were still firing the Fabrique Nationale FNC-1 7.62 millimeter ammunition, 13 pounds fully loaded assault rifle, and and the equipment. The equipment was pretty basic. You know, you were like when they're talking about boots on the ground, that's pretty well all you are is a boot on the ground. So where does that take us now? Well, let's look at the Canadian Armed Forces military personnel instruction. This is a recent publication that just came out this year, and this deals with the ethos. So if we look at acceptable use of assessment results, or just go to responsibilities here. What they're saying is that people that are, basically they're doing interviews with people to ensure that they're thinking properly. Now we're looking at Armed Forces ethos and how to use it. You go to respect the dignity of all persons. They've rewritten the ethos for military ethos, but I want to take you down to military values. Inclusion. Those who are inclusive, now remember, once you're a commander or a lieutenant colonel in the Canadian Armed Forces, you're going to be given a psychological interview, and they're going to make sure that your thinking is right. And these are the things that you need to ensure that your thinking is right during the interview, because if you answer wrong, you're not going to be part of the Uber clique. You're not going to get promoted, and you're not going to be part of the new ideological realm that they're building in the Canadian Armed Forces. Those who are inclusive reject racism, sexism, heteronormativity, homophobia, xenophobia, and any other form of hateful, discriminatory, or hurtful behavior, conduct, or association. Okay, so first let's deal with hateful and discriminatory or hurtful behavior. People who write stuff like this, I've never had to spend much time in a trench. I never had to spend a lot of time learning how to do difficult things under a lot of stress because people can get pretty hyped up. And there's a lot of yelling, there's a lot of screaming, and there's going to be a lot of noise in combat. And that's why you need to really prepare people for that. And you do this by stressing them in their training environment. You do this by calling them names. You do this by saying they're doing things wrong. You're basically beating them senselessly, mentally, so that they can build up psychological defenses to the reality of combat. Because war is not pretty. War is only has one result. You basically have to subdue and unalive your enemy in order to win that and put your boots on his ground. And that's pretty well it for the military. But if you go into a combat situation, you're saying, oh, those poor people on the other side, I wish I didn't have to, maybe lob rounds at them. And somebody next to you goes, Kilo India Lima Lima, those filthy buggers over there. And then, that they'd be grabbing them off the line and says, you can't say nasty things about the enemy. That's wrong. You're being discriminatory and hateful. And it's, these people are insane. These people are insane. Now I understand that what they're talking about here is treating everyone respectfully, but they're breaking it down into stupidity because that's how the binary thinking of the far left is. Because they won't be able to differentiate what goes on in at work in garrison and what happens in the field or in combat because their brains are broken. Heteronormativity. Let's look at the definition that Google has. A concept referring to the societal assumption that heterosexuality is the normal or preferred sexual orientation and that all individuals naturally align with traditional gender roles in relationships, often with a focus on the nuclear family. And it goes on to say it essentially assumes that all people are either male or female and that heterosexuality is the only natural or normal expression of sexuality with associated traditional gender roles. So basically, by putting this comment of heteronormativity in their ethos descriptions whenever they start doing interviews with lieutenant colonels and above for their promotions, is if you come out and say that the natural order of things in order for species to propagate is to be heteronormative, in that the only way to propagate a species is for opposite sexes to engage in a heterosexual relationship. If you talk about things like that, you're going to get promoted. Your thinking's not right. You're not thinking gay enough. Heteronormativity is the normal state of affairs on this planet for all creatures. But what they've done is they've gone and said that promoting heteronormativity is now a hate crime. No wonder people are leaving the armed forces when they find out this kind of BS is going on. All right. So just a reminder, this directive is still there. I look it up almost every day to make sure that, oh yeah, it's still requiring the troops to take 3 jibby jabs to stay employed. Now, personnel readiness verification. You're going to go through, you're going to see that when I'm talking about the TES of a squadron, every year, every other year, or every third year, depending on your readiness level of your unit and perhaps of yourself, because even though you belong to a unit with a certain readiness level, you may have been allocated to another readiness team, like they have here in Trenton, the disaster Area Relief Team, I think it's called, DART, and they have people from all the different units on the base. So they have to maintain a higher level of readiness. When we look at the documents in the military, they're going to be looking at all the things that military personnel have to maintain continually throughout their entire career when they're there, right? They have to make sure that their immunizations are up for North America and that their medical category is up to date. The younger you are, the longer your medical category is fine, as long as you don't get hurt. And then you go in for your regular medical screenings every 3, 4, or 5 years, whatever it is for your age. Immunizations for North America, right? So your standard immunizations that everyone usually gets in the civilian world. If you have a record of those, you're good to go. Which really peed me off. All those anti-vax slurs that still exist today. I've done another piece on that, especially over at Athabasca University, knowing that all our military personnel were already really immunized. And then to say that they're anti-immunization because they refused this one experimental injection that has harmed and unalived so many people. Now, your deployment, what was it called? DAG deployment. I can't remember what the acronym is, but we used to get DAG, and you would go up to the orderly room, and you would make sure that all these forms are up to date. You make sure that your military driver's license is up to date, if you have one. And it was a trend that happened during the last 10 years I was in the armed forces. Every year we'd have more and more people joining the Canadian Armed Forces without a driver's license, never having a driver's license. Personnel support program, force evaluation tests. Got to do it every year. Security clearance and verification. Make sure that your identity disc is good, your ID card is up to date. Training, weapons handling. Depending on your unit, you should be firing your weapon off every year, and not necessarily with live ammunition. A lot of the bases now have virtual trainers, and it's actually the virtual trainers are fantastic. There was stuff that they were showing me in my last couple of years in the armed forces I wish I'd had when when I first joined. Uh, the fact that a computer could trigger your release time on the trigger, not only the amount of pressure put onto the trigger. Oh, it's just the science is outstanding. But there's no replacement for firing a live weapon on the range, in the weather, with the smell and the sound, and of course having to run up and down that range and operating the butts, the entire experience. Trainers are outstanding. Those virtual trainers are great. There's no replacement for firing live every year. But that's what they've done because they have to save money somewhere. They'll do virtual training 1 year, maybe live training the year after that. Again, it depends on your readiness level. Chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear training. Well, that's basically your mass drills. First aid training, keep that up to date. And depending on your position, you might have to do CPR per year. Portable fire extinguisher training. What a joke. We used to actually have to put real fires out with real fire extinguishers after an in-class lesson on how to use the fire extinguishers. What do they do now? What have they been doing for the past 10 years in Canadian Armed Forces? They don't put fuel in large pans, set fire to it, and then have you try different fire extinguishers to put it out. Feeling the heat of the fire so that you can go in and actually experience that. No, what do they have? They will have a large screen TV in the room on a fake fire extinguisher that's electronically connected up to the screen, and then they put up a scenario up on the screen, and then people are supposed to walk up with a fire extinguisher and then practice the drills that they've been shown, approaching the fire, crouching low, coming in low. No, you'll have an office person who just picks it up, walks up to the screen, and just a little wiggle in front of the screen, and then the fire goes out and goes, "Oh, you passed." Yeah, so just to say that you have pretty well anyone who has been in the armed forces who was joined in the last 10 years, uh, they have never experienced putting out a fire for real training. They've had virtual training, so good luck with that. Unique military stuff. We got unique military occupation requirements, Navy requirements, Air Force requirements. Right. So depending on your element, you may have specified training that's specific to your element and even your wing. This might be handling certain stuff on the flight line. Yeah. Medical. Um, Public service healthcare plan. Um, so they're making sure that your other paperwork is up to date. Now, generating readiness. In terms of readiness as a military context, is the capability, people and resources of a force to carry out missions assigned to it by a government. The goal of military readiness is to ensure that a force is prepared, equipped, and able to complete tasks at any time and in any place. Yeah, okay. Good luck with that, boys. Now, here's the results. Here's the results of readiness in the Canadian Armed Forces. It goes right to the core of what that article was talking about at the CBC. So we hear in 2021, percentage of force elements that are ready for operations in accordance with established targets. So in 2021 to 2022, or sorry, 2020 to 2022, they were able to maintain apparently a 71% TES across the board, across all the armed forces. Remember, this is during the COVIDity stupidity. There was nothing going on. Whatever was going on, I think the only real deployment that occurred, other than what was going on overseas, were sending our people into old age homes to help with the COVIDity stupidity because apparently staff had fled in fear, didn't want to take care of our own citizens. And with nothing going on, I mean, there was nothing going on. Training was stopped. Operations were maintained at a minimum. People were working from home. People were forced to work from home. And there was a big administrative burden at the time because they were in a process of getting ready to release 10% of the Canadian Armed Forces because they were refusing to take the experimental injection. So these numbers that they have here are not actually real effective strength numbers. These are holdover numbers because I'm sure what they did is they just signed off on people's basic military readiness training because the readiness training was only happening for people that were deploying. If there were people deploying and it was readiness training required, they made it happen. But the regular readiness training that people needed to go on just to keep up their things, that was all being cut back. So this number here, I find it rather difficult that they were actually going to be able to. I find it difficult to believe that there was actually training going on to keep these numbers up. Because you look right here, 2023, why was there a short drop? Oh, is it because you finally got rid of all those nasty anti-vaxxers in the CAF? Sudden drop like that? 10%? And what's it like now? Oh, I got a video. Sound on that?
That strikes at what the military calls readiness, the ability to deploy soldiers and equipment when and where needed. It's supposed to be at 90%. Instead, it's been at 40%. In no small part because the Canadian military is short 12,000 people. And the federal government had already proposed growing its ranks. By that measure, it needs vastly more personnel. You can't flick a switch and turn somebody into a professional soldier overnight. How long does it actually take to price them into the system?
Well, it takes a while. You know, there's recruitment, there's basic training. It's not just land, sea, and air anymore. There's cyberspace, land, sea, and air. So there's new forms of training that need to be developed, new equipment, new capacity, new security frameworks and security strategies that have to chart out the pathway.
In short, strengthening Canada's military is not just about spending money. It would be a gargantuan effort that would have to be approached with urgency, at the same time recognizing they could move fast on some things, but other aspects would take years to restore military capability.
Right. Or was that number? 41%. So we've gone from 61% down to 41% of readiness. That number is going to continue to drop. Now, they were talking about pricing them in because that's how bureaucrats see the military, as only a monetary function, a monetary burden. How do we price these people in? And why are they talking about, oh, we have all this new technology and blah, blah, blah? Yeah, okay, that's fine. There are a few trades within the Canadian Armed Forces and even some new trades that have been created because of changes in technology. That's all very fine. But that's a very small percentage of the actual boots on the ground that we need in the Canadian military. A very, very, very small percentage. Because the majority of all the other existing trades out there are part of a functioning military. But these few new pieces of technology that are coming in, of course, there's going to be a needed partnership with the civilian side as technology changes. And it's very, very difficult and expensive for the military to set up specialized training for its own people if they're only going to provide it for a few of them. I think the one of the smallest trades in the Canadian Armed Forces is mapping and charting. And they have an inverse pyramid up at the top because the higher up in rank you get, the more courses you needed. I don't even know if that trade still exists. All right, let's move on. Right. So just again, a reminder here, you have all the other things that people need to keep up on their readiness training. Individual battle standards, the IBTS for land operations. IBTS for land ops. And that's all the stuff that we were talking that you saw earlier, that it will put a recruit through, that IBTS training. Now, of course, depending on your position and where you are on the brick, that's what they call. They usually have this little matrix done up on a spreadsheet where they have all the all the training requirements down on the left and all the positions up at the top, and in between there'll be X's put into your position and the training requirements that you need to do to fill that position on deployment. And depending on that, you may not need to do the 9mm Browning service pistol training like they have here, because you're only going to be issued a rifle and you're not going to have access to a pistol. So they may say, oh, if I look down on my brick and I'm going, oh, I don't get the 9mm training. Okay, fine. Or I might say, hey, look, I am getting 9mm training. And then you get overseas and go, oh, no, you're not getting a 9mm. Here's a rifle. That's okay. Because at least I'm up to date on the training. So when he hands me one, I'm not going to blow off my foot, hopefully. Now here's a little list from a reserve unit, and you can see for them, uh, because this is just their training requirements, right? So every 2 years, they have to do their information security, which is an online course. Their media awareness, IS level 1, every 3 years, again, an online course. Firing your personal weapon every year. Right? But now when they go into their training requirements, it may mean, yeah, every year, but every other year in the simulator and every other year on the range. Here we go. CBRN, wearing your gas mask every 3 years, first aid every 3 years. Of course, but your CPR is only good for a year. And then your force test every year. And they've got this little list down here. Now, this was Charlotte Duval Antoine. She was the one who was in the article regarding the recruit training, and her Substack has these numbers. So here we go in 2019, 2020, and 2021, the really bad COVIDity stupidity years, right? You still had almost as many people want to join as they had last year. And then you can see how many candidates actually enrolled. So these people applied to the recruiting office. These people were accepted. But then out of these people that were accepted, how many of them actually made it to training? And once they got into training, how many of them actually completed the training? So we know that they have reduced the requirements for people joining the Canadian Armed Forces. In fact, they're bringing in people with anxiety issues. They're doing everything they can to try to bring people in, and it's not working. Now I want to get on to this right here, the moral injury. The last 3 years after I left the armed forces, I was not in a really good place. Not a really good place mentally. And it's really only been the last couple of months that I've been able to come out of this funk. And all because the only reason I believe that I've been able to survive this long with the abuse that I was given in the military for refusing this jibby jab was because of me having a higher power, me being able to find solace and pray to be able to deal with this abuse on a daily basis. And it really wasn't until the last couple of months that, like I said, that I've come out of this. And then today, during my research, I just happened to fall into this new edition uh, in Canadian Armed Forces doctrine, talking about understanding the moral injury. And when I read through this, it's exactly, it's exactly what happened to me. Over the course of a life, and more specifically throughout military service, Canadian Armed Forces members may experience significant events. These events and how they impact each individual will differ from person to person and can also change depending on a person's life circumstances. What is a moral injury? Potential moral injurious events, PMIEs, they always have to create new acronyms, are events that violate these deeply held values and beliefs and often leave a person with a deep sense of unease or a feeling that something just isn't right. It is important to understand that colleagues or leaders may not be able to predict if an event will be morally injurious to an individual, as so much depends on one's own set of beliefs, values, and person's personal experiences. PMIEs generally fall into one of three categories: acts of commission, acts of omission, and acts of betrayal. An act of commission is when someone does something that violates their own deeply held values and beliefs of right and wrong. So, coercing people into an injurious, deadly, experimental mRNA gene therapy, rebranded as a jibby jab, was the commission. An act of omission is when someone should have done something in alignment with their values but did not. Nobody spoke up. We could see that people were getting injured as they were taking the jibby jab. We could see that people were suddenly not with us anymore. But nobody would do anything. We could obviously tell that this was wrong, but nobody would do anything. An act of omission. And finally, an act of betrayal is when an individual feels betrayed by others, often a higher authority, who either failed to act, or compelled someone to act contrary to their values. And that was the final piece. Complete act of betrayal. We felt definitely betrayed by a higher authority that went ahead, used the general ears, notwithstanding of remedial measures, CDS Directive 002, so that they could betray the social contract that many of us veterans had with our country through the military. And that is why this is the perfect way to end this stream, is to remind everybody why people should not join the Canadian Armed Forces. Because you will be exposed to moral injury. Once you find out how they disrespect you and how they have disrespected their veterans and how they injured and unalived their members for an experimental injection and continue to refuse to accept responsibility for it. A complete act of betrayal. Well, thanks for coming out. If you stayed all the way to the end of this live stream, it's outstanding. If you actually watch this video all the way to the end, I know I'm gonna have to clean up the beginning because I was still trying to figure out my live stream issues. There'll be a link down below with some of the information, especially with all the links to all these documents and all these people. All right, I guess we're gonna end it here. Thanks for coming out. Talk to you later. Bye.